Welcome, everyone. It's great to see everyone today for Impact Communication Institute's Impact Council event. This is going to be a wonderful afternoon discussion, and I am confident we're all going to walk away just a little bit smarter, feel a little bit like more empowered around our leadership journey. And so my name is Brad McAfee. I will be your host and moderator. I'm the CEO of Mission and Cause, but I also am a founding board member for Impact Communications Institute. We're joining each other today from a number of unceded lands and territories across the entire globe. Our presenter and myself are based in Atlanta and work in the city, which is situated on Muskogee Creek and Cherokee lands. And I would just like to mention, we have a really strong article in the latest agenda talking about land acknowledgements. And as more and more of our organizations are really looking into this and being respectful to the Indigenous people, I would encourage everyone to look at that. There's some great links and resources there. Just a little bit of housekeeping for those of you who might be joining for one of the first times. Impact Communications Institute is a 501c3. Our whole entire reason for being is we're committed to educating professional communicators on the discipline of authentic and transparent communications. And we just fundamentally believe the use of tools and communication can really drive positive systemic change that really can impact communities and societies across the entire globe. If you look at our membership, and I call it more of a community membership, we're about 1,200 plus strong. And this truly crosses the whole entire globe. And there are ways, if you haven't already, that you can get even more involved in the organization. First, I would encourage you to sign our pledge around authentic and transparent communication. You can find that pledge at impactcommsinstitute.org. Or you sign up for our newsletter. We had so many good articles from really great leaders in this space that are sharing their learnings and their education with each other. For today, if you feel so moved, our handle on X is ImpactComms INST, short for Institute, ImpactComms INST, or please feel free to use the hashtag comms, the number 4 change. Finally, the last thing I want to say is we put together these impact councils for a reason, to share amongst each other. We all have something that we could teach and learn from each other. So we try to do these once or twice a month, and we have some great programming we're going to talk about at the conclusion, what's coming up next. But one of the things that we're committed to is making sure that these are free events for us to attend. And so if you love what you're hearing here today, not only sign up for more of these events, but I would encourage you, go as wide as you'd like within your organizations. People you really think would benefit from hearing these lessons, please bring them into Impact Communications Institute. All right. Am I good? I'm looking at my folks. Am I good on home housekeeping? Okay, we can move forward. Great. Excellent. So as you can tell, I'm excited. I'm excited to talk with our speaker today, Archie L. Jones Jr. He's an author. He's a Harvard Business School professor, and he's the founder and CEO of Next Gen Coach Network. He is a social impact leader who has been driving change on campuses, through partnerships, and through his board service, not only with publicly traded companies, but also leading nonprofit organizations as well. He's recognized for a recent book that just came out called The Treasure You Seek. You're probably going to hear us talk a little bit about some of those principles here in just a minute. And he's a host of an incredible podcast called Training Camp for Leaders. And we'll make sure that we get these links in the chat so that you guys have ready access for this. And I have to say, in full disclosure, so everyone knows, Archie and I work together. We work together to promote his mission to democratize Harvard-level education for underrepresented communities and emerging leaders everywhere. Please help me in welcoming our Impact Council speaker for today, Archie L. Jones. Archie.
Thank you. Thank you
It's
so
nice
much
to
for
have you.
having me. It's so great to be here.
I got to tell you, this is one of these. You've had a whole entire career, Merrill Lynch, working on the private equity side, doing M&A. And then all of a sudden, in the last few years, like this passion that you've had on democratizing education must have really bubbled up. So I'm going to ask you first, tell us a little bit about that journey for you, and then maybe give us a little bit of background and tee us up for today's conversation.
Sure, sure. Again, so thankful for being here. Thank you for having me. I'd say that, there were some pivotal moments in the last, or a couple pivotal moments in the last 5 years. I did Leadership Atlanta. And one of the things I'll talk to you about as we talk through is this idea of, for leaders in particular, to be able to slow down and actually work kind of on the business of yourself, on your own leadership capability. And so I took advantage of that opportunity to do some self-reflection. They asked me an interesting question as a part of an assessment. When was I happiest and most effective? And also asked that of some folks that I had worked with before. And the answer that came back, it was when I was teaching or coaching. And what was unique about that is that was not my day job. I had spent my prior career, most of all of my career in private equity. And so realizing that what I was supposed to be doing and what my quote unquote superpower was teaching or coaching, I looked differently at how am I going to make that not just the 20% of what I do, but 80% of what I do. And so I went back to my alma mater, my business school alma mater to teach. So now I teach at Harvard Business School. I've graduated from that 25 plus years ago. I got serious, I'd call it serious and focused and intentional in my board work. I continue to do for-profit board work as well as some very interesting and impactful social and nonprofit board work. And also then founded the Next Gen Coach Network, which was all about some of those lessons that I was teaching on campus to take those off campus. So I keep this portfolio career in those kind of broad three buckets. I still do some private equity investing as well, but it's a much smaller part of that kind of four rings of portfolio. And the way that I'm able to reach out to social impact leaders through those is, at the Harvard Business School, there's a social enterprise initiative, and I'm a lead faculty member in that. And we recently did a program called Upswell Forum. We brought social leaders from Houston, Atlanta, and Boston. We brought them to campus for some on-campus education and training, and then did some offline work as well. Again, hoping that some of those same leadership lessons that we're teaching at the Harvard Business School will resonate with leaders taking it out to their communities. And I love the idea of not only bringing the community to the business school, but also taking the business school out into the community as well.
That is fantastic, and one of the things that's been inspirational, listening to some of the activities happening with Upswell Forum and how you're helping some of those social entrepreneurs and startup organizations. I'd
And
also
and we've already said we're going to do. We started that as a pilot, and we're already agreed we're going to do 2.0. And so we brought 30 some odd leaders to campus, and again took them through that program. It'll be about the same size. I'd love to, if folks have some ideas of social entrepreneurs who would love to be a part of such a program, we'd love to hear about those. And then I have to mention one other one. Again, I talk about on campus and off campus. Off campus, the Next Gen Coach Network, we've partnered with Junior Achievement Africa. And so they do some summer programs on entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship. And we've actually put some of our leadership capital framework into that curriculum. And so that'll be touching 800,000 aspiring leaders on the African continent this summer. And so really proud of that work as well.
Archie, I have to say, I mean, we're talking about how we develop these leaders and how we prepare these leaders. You've talked about Upswell, you're talking about Junior Achievement Africa and those activities. Also, one of the things I happen to know is that you're also dedicating a good amount of your time of coaching up that next generation that could sit on boards, whether that's for-profit or nonprofit boards. And there has been a lot of great research that says as we have more diverse representation in our leadership or in our boardrooms, those organizations do better. And at the same time, there's been a real push. There's also been a real call for we need more talent and more opportunities to bring more people on these boards. Talk to us a little bit about what that part of your world looks like.
Yeah, you can think of it as, kind of bottoms up, as well as top down, right? The work I talk about in JAA is kind of bottoms up, right? Starting with aspiring leaders, some folks who don't even know if they think of themselves as leaders yet. They're still trying to discover that leader within. But then the work at the board level is top down, right? Where policy is made. And so I think of it as, if you've got a strategy, you're attacking it at both ends. And the work to get great qualified people some board opportunities and let those diverse views come into the boardroom, I think is a great 1-2 punch, if you will, to try and have broader social impact. Again, growing leaders who are going to be the next generation of leaders, but also putting policymakers in place who can start to drive some of that impact today.
For all of us listening here, you said something as you kind of started. You said, I've got this portfolio career. And, you're kind of really bringing it to life for us and what that looks like, in terms of all these different activities that you're doing that's on and driving toward the same bigger overarching mission, but doing it consistently with different groups, right? To elevate that leadership. One of the things that's exciting about this group that's joined us today is everyone on this session is a leader in their own right or on their leadership journey in some way.
Yeah.
I would, and the whole focus of this is talking about how social impact leaders can really elevate their journey and quite frankly, leverage leadership capital. So one of the things that I might ask for you to ground us in, you've got this great principle in your recent book, The Treasure You Seek, talking about leadership capital. But I'm not sure everyone understands leadership capital, right? We understand variety of capital, but leadership capital might not be a term that everyone's familiar with.
No, I'd love to do that. And I'll start with the capital sources that you do know about. So everyone knows about financial capital, right? Having the dollars to be able to invest and do the things you want to do. We don't talk about it as much, but you probably understand experiential capital as well, right? Those journeys that you've already been on, those experiences and things that you've accomplished that you bring to the table, that knowledge base that's based on actions. So I think of experiential capital. And the third one that we talk about is social capital, right? That you've got relationships and connections that you can leverage and invest. But I think the thing and I'll start with the definition of leadership, my definition of leadership and leadership capital. I define leadership as the art of inspiring and activating others to join you on a journey towards a goal, right? And I specifically call it an art because you got a lot of different styles that you can bring to bear on that. And what the framework tries to do is to bring a little bit of science to that art of leadership. And so leadership is that art of bringing folks with you on a journey. Leadership capital is the currency that is going to cost to fuel that journey. And that breaks down into 5 C's of leadership capital. The first one is capability. In this framework, you've got to know what your superpower is and that you bring something special to the table. The second one is culture, bringing your full self, all of that history and heritage, some of which may not be necessarily proud of, that you need to bring that to the table, or that you don't think that you should be that proud of, or that you may not think of as valuable. You need to bring that culture to the table. Communication, you know this one better than I do, but I'll at least tell you how I think about it. It's telling yourself a different story so you can tell the world a different story. And you can see how these start to connect a bit. And I think you'll appreciate that one on the communication side. And then connection. One of my Archieisms is the answer's in your network. Almost every meaningful opportunity that I've been given has come through a relationship where someone else is investing their leadership capital in me. And so that connection, that 4th C is a big one. And then last but not least, I think the one that as aspiring and current leaders that we continue to grapple with is confidence. How do I build up the confidence to get started? And how do I keep the confidence to keep going? And so that's the 5th C in the framework. And I use that framework as I'm coaching leaders, because most of the time we're focused on how do I get more financial capital, social capital, or experiential capital. And it's tough to see, well, what do I do? This framework gives you some building blocks. I think of this as the kind of as the fundamental steps, those underlying tools that if you work on those 5 C's, it will bring to you or make it easier for you to get that financial capital or that social capital or experiential capital.
Archie, when you describe the 5 C's, right? I mean, this sounds like a great framework. I get it. And I'm curious, but I am curious, right?
Yeah.
Are they dependent on each other? Can you be, like, can you be stronger one or two and still have development or growth opportunities in another couple too? And, like, do they work? How do they work together? Maybe kind of give us a little bit more practical.
Sure. I'd love to. I think there's 2 ways I'd have you think about the interconnectivity. One is I think of those first two and half of the third, communication. So capability of looking inside of yourself to know what your special gift or superpower is. That's an internal kind of journey, as well as the culture, right? Looking inside, looking at your long-term history in terms of your heritage, but also the household you grew up in and the experiences you've been through. That's an internal journey. And then on that communication piece, it's kind of the dividing line. You tell, again, I said, tell yourself a different story so you can tell the world a different story. I have folks thinking differently about how they craft what I call that internal resume of, what do you really boast about? What do you highlight? What are those things that, again, build that confidence? And then it kind of goes external. You're communicating externally, you're using that to make connections, you're showing that confidence. So that's one way of connection. And to your second question, or buried in your question was, well, can I be mixed and match amongst those? And the answer is yes. And I know we'll post the website somewhere, but there's an assessment on there, leadership capital assessment. We probably ask you a half a dozen questions around those 5 C's. And we can actually map you or you map yourself, I should say, onto a 2x2 that says I'm either I'm almost an undiscovered leader. I don't know, much about what my goals are or how to get there. And I don't know how to start working towards it. And you almost end up in 4 distinct kind of buckets, either undiscovered leaders. I'm still trying to figure out where I am on my journey. I'm a pilot, so I made it laid out in kind of aviation terms. I've got low flying leaders who are getting a lot done, but they really are uninspired, if you will. They're not reaching their highest goal. They don't have a big, hairy, audacious goal. They're kind of making progress and flying low below the radar screen, not taking a lot of risk. And then you've got a third quadrant in there of what I call runway leaders, got big ideas, but not making any movement towards them. And so you'll see that in the assessment. And then we've got in-flight leaders, those folks who are already making some progress, but looking to change the game, so to speak. And so you can be in any one of those, and you should think about those as phases, because I think as leaders, we kind of at points go through all of those. And so usually what it will point to is you can do a little bit more work on communication and connection, or you could do a little bit more work on self-discovery. And so, yes, you could be strong in one of those and need some work in the other. And that's the other thing about working in teams is when I lay out this framework and you see your assessment for groups, you're able to see that some folks have something very strong where others in the group have some things they need to work on. And it opens up this wonderful opportunity, for collaboration where you've got something strong, Brad. You're strong in communications and I need some work there. We can work on that together.
Archie, I absolutely think this is great. And I want to just drill down just a little bit on communications and also just say to everyone attending, as you have questions, don't hesitate, drop them into the chat and we'll pick them up as they work within the flow of the conversation. Archie, on communications for a second, since we have so many communicators in the room, right? I love what you said because, often many of us, when we're talking about messaging or storytelling with clients about how they tell their story and their impact story, we usually will say your first audience, and everyone says, oh yeah, my internal employees. And we say, no, first audience is yourself. Do you believe what you're saying? Are authentically, genuinely, are you being like, do you believe it first and foremost? Then we need to have our employees and those our partners and those around, and then we're going to those external audiences. And you had recently a really great piece um, that you contributed to Forbes that was around personal brand and your own personal brand and communicating your personal brand and the power that that could give in terms of maybe additional connections or ways to really engage with others. Tell us a little bit about um, your point of view on communicating a personal brand and why that's important.
Yeah, I love that. I love that one. And you know, this idea of a personal brand, and it almost becomes a silent communication of the brand. I would describe it. I was actually at a board of directors meeting, a group of board members or potential board members this morning, and we were talking about, again, personal brand, rewriting resumes and rewriting LinkedIn profiles and the things that you would think about in terms of how you rebrand or update or evolve your brand. And what became clear as I was sharing with a couple of the leaders there is the real brand or the real resume is what I call your walking around resume. Most of the times, and I'll speak from a board standpoint, right? Most of the times when I'm trying to help people get onto boards, you already know the person that can recommend you and will recommend you to get on a board. And they've watched you operate, not in this interview format or this now it's time for the commercial, the Archie commercial. It actually is the walking around commercial every day of I saw him, you know, in a board meeting or in a leadership position or us working through a difficult challenge. And so again, to that internal piece, but that internal piece, I think is certainly true. But I also think it's daily, right? It's not waiting for the Super Bowl ad, you know, just so kind of one time a year. I think it's the regular walking around every day. I got to see him operate almost when they didn't even know you were when you didn't really think of them as watching, but they were watching you lead or they were watching you communicate. If that's what we're talking about, they were watching you deliver on that skill. And it goes back to that superpower point. People are watching to see, and they probably know it better than you, just like some of my friends did in that assessment. That you're, even though I didn't think of myself as a coach, that's how they thought of me. That's the brand that was, you know, kind of seeking out of my pores, if you will, that I didn't need to have it, you know, on a t-shirt to say that's what it was. They were actually seeing it as a walk around brand.
Archie, I just want to share a quick story. This walking around brand, I'm going to use that now. One of the things that I will tell you, so being that we're in Atlanta, a close relationship with the University of Georgia, right? An incredible communications department there and school. And every single year for 15 years now, the dean will walk up to me and hand me a list of 5 to 10 names. And I'll just say, start here if you're looking for the top talent in our university that's graduating, right? Now, when then I go and speak to people at the students at UGA and they ask for tips and advice, I say it starts in the classroom. And then I tell the story, and then you either see people smile because they know that they show up with their full self every day, and then or you see people terrified saying, "Oh, I right, yeah, maybe I missed that." This walk around brand of how people experience you and who you are and what you bring to the table. That's a great that's a great concept. And what I want to do as well, since we're kind of talking about hiring and all that,
Yeah.
Piper, can I bring you in to ask your question? I think it's relevant now. She has a question on organizations and hiring.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for the opportunity, Archie. It's great to be hearing from you. To clarify, I've been working with several organizations over the past few years and hearing some who have struggled a bit. They're in their hiring. They'll bring someone on and find that they're just not the right fit for the job. And in some cases, they'll try to narrow down the area of responsibilities, trying to find what their, what their sweet spot is and really wanting to keep them on the team, which I credit to being, and I don't want to suggest that other organizations wouldn't do the same, but I'm mostly in the nonprofit space. And so
Yeah.
I see a lot of big hearts and sometimes really small budgets. And so potentially keeping folks on maybe longer than is helpful. And, ideally you just don't want to invest all the time up front and then not have it work. And so I'm curious if you have thoughts on how to make a really strong selection in the first place, then creating a place where folks thrive? And if they're not, how to make that determination, should they stay or should they go?
No, great question. Great question. You may be surprised with the answer or to take it in a little different direction of, I actually spent a lot of time helping companies think about hiring as a part of a prior life of in an executive role at a talent management firm. And I'll tell you one of the things that I think it starts with, and it probably is particularly strong or needed in a nonprofit setting where in some cases, you can to where you were going, you can almost be too nice and too welcoming. I think one of the best ways to screen is for the organization to be absolutely clear and authentic about what it is and what it isn't, and to help people self-select out to start with and what that culture is. Because I think if you make it too inviting, and in some cases, we kind of say, come one, come all, and we're this great and happy place. It is not a place for everybody. And I think you, again, got to do the internal work in that organization to say, look at the people who, and we used to do these assessments, look at the people who have been successful in this organization. And there's a profile there to them, right? There is a set of or range of skills, qualities, and attributes that make up your most successful set of folks. And that ought to be how you go out and advertise for new positions. And where you get a little bit nervous, and you should, is that also going to mean there's going to be a number of people who are not going to apply because they're going to say that doesn't appeal to me. And so you start to get this self-selecting out, which makes you nervous as a hirer because you want everybody in the funnel. But you actually ought to start with a smaller funnel because it's clear that only certain personality types, traits, skills, whatever it may be, are actually going to long-term be successful, and values, right? And don't forget values in there. So I'm not just talking about I'm just not talking about the actual tactical work product, but also what does the culture feel like? What are our values as an organization? Put all of those things on the table, figure out how to screen for those. And then, and this will tie a little bit back to the business school work. And because I actually taught a case on hiring. In an entrepreneurial setting, we talk a lot about running experiments. And we run experiments on everything else in our business usually, right? Does the product actually work? Will it sell in this way? You can run those same experiments on employees. This idea of try before you buy, right? You ought to have them work on a short-term project for a couple weeks or a couple months before you give them a long-term position. These kind of things, it's hard for someone to not be who they really are for an extended period of time. So look for opportunities to actually test that the same way we would any other product or software solution or anything else we brought into the organization. You wouldn't just introduce that to the whole organization. You'd actually test it out and pilot it. So that'd be my advice on that.
That's really
Does that
helpful.
help?
Thank you. It really does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the question, Piper. And I'd like to, Tessa, I'm going to bring you in. I like your question here, and I think it's a good one for this time too.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. And hi, Archie. Thanks again for being here. I really was reflecting on what Brad said about how our first audience is ourselves. And I think it takes a certain level of self-confidence and belief in yourself to really make the story that we're telling special and resonate with others. And so I'd love to hear from you, Archie, what your advice is for Black and Indigenous folks, people who belong to other underrepresented communities. How can they build additional kind of confidence, resilience, and spiritual health, knowing everything that those folks are unfairly up against as they navigate their leadership practice?
No, I'd be happy to answer that one. I have to be honest though. As a professor, I spend time cold calling other people, not getting cold called with questions. So this is a fun turnabout for me. So, and it actually be a good test of continuing test of the Harvard Business School training where you get cold called many times a day. So I love the question. So we've actually at Next Gen Coach Network, we've created a cultural balance sheet. And I'll take you through what that looks like, and because I think it illuminates exactly the point of what you're describing. And I'm an accountant, so it's fun to try and put an accounting term into something that everybody can use. But if you think about a balance sheet, and I'll use a home just to make the analogy work for you, right? You think about, so balance sheet's got assets, liabilities, and an equity, right? And if you think about a house, the full value and the asset value of the house needs to be greater than what you owe in terms of your mortgage so that you've got some equity left in it, right? That equity is what you've got available to invest. You've got extra, you've got some opportunity, you've got some risk taking in that, the ability to invest in others. When you look at, and I think for a lot of underrepresented, underestimated leaders, they look at their balance sheet and they can quote you chapter and verse about all the liabilities, and the liability case becomes long, or section becomes long, and the asset portion is short. Then you end up with negative equity, which means I've got nothing to give, right? If you think about your mortgage being underwater, I've got nothing to give, right? I'm in the hole. And think about how that would have you operating. And that's the mindset that they're operating in. And so with this cultural balance sheet, we take them through this paradigm shift of almost every one of those liabilities, right? I grew up without a lot of financial resources, right? That supposedly disqualifies me as a liability. I turn that on its head and say, well, you've gotten a lot done with a little, right? And so that's that ability to turn is entrepreneurship defined, to be able to turn something out of nothing. This idea that I've been through, whether it's mental health, whether it's physical challenges or other that you have persevered through, gives you some tenacity and this ability to sustain in tough times. And so that's not just on the liability side, that needs to be probably doubled down on the asset side. And when I get them to refocus or recategorize these items, that almost everything that they think about as a negative actually has an underlying positive. As an employee, as an entrepreneur, as an entrepreneur, they get a different balance sheet that says, I'm not operating from a deficit. I can even put slavery on that list. I personally spend a lot of time needing to get comfortable with the fact that I'm the descendant of slaves. And rather than that being a point of shame, I've been to the point of no return. And guess what? I survived. My ancestors survived that torturous, treacherous trip. I'm a survivor of that. If I can survive that, and I'm from a people that can survive that, I can survive economic downturn or possibly getting laid off or whatever short-term thing there is. There's a resilience that's built inside of my culture. And so I think that's the story. And we've got exercises on the website and in the book to help take leaders through that. And again, that cuts across racial and socioeconomic, because everybody's been through something. Everybody's got their balance sheets a little bit off in their mental or their belief around their cultural balance sheets off, and can benefit from that exercise. But that's how I like to have leaders shift that paradigm and start to feel emboldened by the thing. I was talking to a leader yesterday who was homeless at one point. Well, that also points to, again, a level of resilience and a level of going through some things that would have, probably taken a number of other people just completely off kilter, that they've survived. And so that's how I think about that one is if not using the exact cultural balance sheet, that something that helps them have that paradigm shift.
Wow.
Does that help?
That
Wow.
is really powerful, Archie. Thank you. And ties into, if it's not a good time, it's a good story, and making those challenges really compelling. So I appreciate you sharing.
You got it.
Archie, I'm going to take this culture balance sheet that you just described. In way early in our conversation here, you started off by saying senior people and reflecting enough on their careers and looking back and seeing how they arrived to where they are, right?
Yeah.
And I do think sometimes these kind of can connect together a little bit. That I often see that, we've got a lot of senior people on this session right here, that people don't pause long enough. They don't always have the time to reflect, right? They're in the daily grind each and every day. But I'm kind of curious, because you're coaching all sorts of leaders, right? You're coaching board members. For those on the call, I'm not breaching confidentiality, but Archie has some of the most interesting social entrepreneurs up and coming, like Fawn Weaver, who is the CEO of the first Black female-owned whiskey brand, Uncle Nearest.
Yep.
Or bring a Big Brown toy box, or brown toy
box. Brown toy box.
box, right?
But it is getting bigger. So I like the big in there. So, but it's brown toy box. But it's growing.
So these social entrepreneurs, let me ask you though, what's going on in leaders' heads, all of our heads, that we're seemingly saying not good enough, not this enough, not that enough, didn't do enough. Like many leaders, I think, are have an inner voice that's saying you got to do more, you're not doing enough, or you're not ready yet. Do you find that in coaching? And do you find
I
that
do. I do, and most of the coaching is a confidence. Is confidence coaching around confidence more than anything else. One of my favorite quotes, and it actually contributed to the title of the book, was "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." And so we often have, I spend a lot of time helping these leaders think about what is that cave, and usually in that very thing that you're afraid to do, that thing that you don't think you have enough of the credentials to do, or enough of the relationships, or any level of those capital that we talk about, whether it's financial, experiential, or social, it's buried within that. And so what we've got to do, and I spend a lot of time juxtaposing, because it talks about the cave, but it also talks about the treasure. And if you get focused on the treasure, or what I think of as the BHAG, or big, hairy, audacious goal, is I've got to get you more excited about the treasure than you are afraid of the cave. And that's the trick, and that's again the paradigm shift that you have to get to there. And so we spend a lot of time on what the BHAG is. And once you get that excited about it, it will help you overcome. For me, it was in coaching, I wanted to get to millions of leaders. And even though I could coach 100 or so a year in the classroom, and I got very comfortable doing that, I wasn't comfortable putting my thoughts down in writing in the form of the book, because then it's out there to be critiqued, and I can't reword it. I can't look in the faces of the audience and say that differently if I don't see heads nodding. It's out there to be scrutinized. And so, but if I was going to get to what that treasure was, that BHAG, that audacious goal, I was going to have to enter that cave. And so I started doing postings, and I started doing small writings and writing articles, and realized that the same way I teach a lot of folks about tiptoeing into whatever their cave is, you don't have to jump all the way into the deep end, if you will. You can shine a flashlight in the cave, or start a fire in there so you can get a look at it. You don't have to go rushing in, but you do need to start making progress against it. And that's what I spend time with. And that's universal across leaders. Is having that hold you back.
And Archie, and please feel free, everyone, to put in your questions in the chat. But on this topic of confidence being one area that you're coaching,
Yeah.
are there any 2020 and beyond trends that you're seeing in coaching? Anything that may have evolved coming out of COVID? Are we seeing coaching on how do I inspire remote employees? Like, what kind of things are you seeing that people are asking for them to grow in their leadership journey?
I think it comes in two buckets. Certainly technology is there. I think this idea, we talk about making personal connections. How do you, in a world that you're becoming increasingly digital, whether we're talking about the number of days in the office or the like, how do you keep a culture and create a culture when we don't spend as much time in the same room together? And so that one is a tactical, practical question that we spend a lot of time on. And the truth is, you got to be even more intentional about making the investment of getting time together. Even then, I mean, we did it during COVID times, but it's gone away. Some of the retreats still could be done online, right? Just because we're no longer in COVID times, we don't do the in-person retreats now, and we don't do the online retreats. I think we could actually get together more often. We could get together in small groups more often. And so this idea that we talk about it as though technology is going to make it harder to make the connections. I think we can turn that on its head and actually leverage it to have even more powerful or even more frequent opportunities to get together in large and small groups.
That's great. And Archie, I'm gonna also offer up to our group here. Feel free to pull off your mute and ask Archie a question. Just jump in if you'd like. But I want to just follow up on what you just said there, because I started drafting a piece today around the power of the offsite. Right. And And because earlier in the week I did this whole thing on, can we be still innovative and around remote working, right? And it got a lot of interest because you have some that are like, gosh, it's still great when we're together, but I don't want to work that way all the time. I want my flexibility. And right, and this is a real, I feel like, tug of war in the workplace right now between employers and employers who can't help but look up and see wasted real estate and the cost of that, and also that feeling of, I know when we're together we get a lot done, while at the same time really understanding that culture is changing and expectations of being in the workplace are changing. So we have this kind of tug of war, but at the heart, the strategic offsite, has all these great benefits. But I don't know if I've ever heard any leader say, what a perfect time to do an offsite. I can't wait to be out of the office 2 days of the week, right? So you have these tensions that come into play. So I appreciate you bringing that up about how we're working today. Yes, any questions for Archie? Christina, would you like to come off of mute and ask your question?
Sure. So in the health and human services field,
Yeah.
we are talking a lot about resilience, building resilience, using strength-based language to build confidence and competency, not just in clients, but also in staff. And I was wondering if that translated to your work or anything that you're seeing in other fields.
It does. It does. I think that, I think again, it goes back to that, a little bit into that, study, if you will, on the culture side of things of, looking for, I think we've all have in our past things that we've gone through, and the sharing of that. And this will tie back to Brad's point. Some of these offsites, some of these strategic sessions need to be more just about the individuals than about whatever the work product is, because I think some of what you're trying to get to in terms of trying to look at and really have folks share and start to coach each other on resilience, those stories are embedded in their personal stories. With these leaders that we brought from Upswell, we spent probably at least a session or two on just that, the things that they'd overcome, the things that they don't like to talk about, the things that they've struggled with. And that created a level of connection in the room and this shared resilience, to your point, that even though they hadn't all been through those things as a group, there was a ton of commonality in the fact that they had all had to struggle through something, and now they saw other folks demonstrating their resilience, and they could coach each other on that.
Christina, does any follow-up there, or does that answer your question?
I think so. Yeah. I think maybe resilience is like an overused word. And so sometimes maybe shows up in different ways, but it just feels like after COVID, we all need to increase our resilience a little bit, and we're all very tired.
We are, we are for sure.
Other questions for Archie? All right, I'm gonna keep us going for a second because I want to shift a little bit, Archie.
Adam, I thought you had something.
Oh, who was that?
Adam, I thought I had something.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, bud.
I popped it into the chat though, but basically one of the things I find really interesting, especially amongst like very senior leaders, and I mentioned like Elon Musk and Whitney Houston in the chat box there, but there's many others, Richard Branson, Bill Gates. There seems to be like a renegade element to them, like they really detest climbing the official ladder and they want to go outside, and those are traits that I think within an organization, within a team, are seen as often very, very toxic, it's unprofessional, doesn't quite work. And I sort of wonder, are these narratives amongst leaders of them being this outsider that breaks the rules, is that to sell a good autobiography, or is there something in that? Is that sort of determination to break the rules a really important part of real successful leadership?
No, it's a great question, and you went and picked the ones out at the far end of the spectrum. I'm not sure that, there's one thing about some of these CEOs that I've learned over time is they don't make great employees. So they almost would have had to have been CEOs of their own thing because they don't usually play that well together with others. But I think there's a you know, beyond that, those extremes, but I think they point us to a good point of there is this underlying comfort with the individuality there. And I'll tell you what you find even inside organizations, those folks who rise up the ladder and, you know, perform at a high level as leaders, they got comfortable going outside of the norm, maybe not to the extreme of the folks that we're talking about there, but they were okay with, you know, if it is not necessarily rule breaking, it certainly is norm breaking. And I've seen that for myself in the classroom. You know, when I started teaching 5 years ago, I spent the first year or first semester trying to teach like other great professors that I saw. And we talked about authenticity at the top of the call, at the top of the meeting. That didn't land very well. And it wasn't until I did it my way, when again, very different than the way some of the other professors did it. I brought some things in that are against the norm. So to this cold calling point, I actually tell them some of the biggest questions as I walk in. I call it my lineup. It's basically warm calls. So it's, Beth, you're going to answer this one when I get there. Piper, you're going to answer that one. Rachel, you're going to answer that one. Different than anybody else does it. And they loved it. And it's this interesting piece of, again, bringing, it looks like innovation. It looks like this avant-garde thing. And most of it is just you getting comfortable with your own leadership style and being comfortable to let that out. You're not trying to break any rules. I wasn't trying to upset any apple cart. It just made me more comfortable in the classroom. And it was authentic. And the students loved it and learned from it. And I think that's more in the vein of what you're describing. And I think is a healthy thing is when each leader starts to bring that, and it's okay to be a little bit different. And it may cause, in some cases, the organization to have to revisit a rule, if you will, unspoken or spoken, that yeah, he does it or she does it a little bit different, but it's okay. Again, not for the idea of just being different, but because it actually can be effective because that's who you authentically are. And I think that could be a powerful thing. And then it points me to the other side of the equation is the leadership in the organization has got to get ready for that, right? Because I talk about in entrepreneurship, you talk about you want folks to be entrepreneurial, but you got to create an environment where they can fail and try some things and they not get slapped on the wrist for I told you not to do that. That's why we do it the other way. You got to actually open up this environment that's open to experimentation and a little bit of trial and error, and giving you a little bit of rope to maybe fail. Hopefully that helps. My man.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you very much. As we're rounding third here, Archie, and on our time together, I'm going to end up asking you two questions, but let's start with, you know, you got to start with the first one before you get to the second one. And what we've got so many leaders, as I mentioned, and impact leaders on this session. Many are already serving on boards, maybe nonprofit boards right now. But if individuals on this on this session are thinking through their own journey into serving on boards and for-profit or nonprofit, what advice might you give to this team? What skills should they be thinking about, or attributes should they be thinking about in their development today to be a great board leader tomorrow?
Yeah, I think I train leaders in three broad buckets. I think your ability to get on and serve effectively on boards is driven by three things. There's the what you know piece. And so you've got to educate yourself around what is the role of a director. There's great organizations like the National Association of Corporate Directors that'll give you all of the, you know, what I call the book learning or training on what the job looks like. So there's the what you know piece, not the most important, but important. There's and this should resonate with communication folks. It's the how you show. It's what story you're telling. What story does your bio tell? And so there's a very different bio or resume for a board than the board or resume for a job. And so I have leaders, I'm helping them work and highlight the things that make you a great director, or even highlight your experiences that actually resonate with folks thinking about a board position. And so the how you show is the second bucket. And then the last one goes back to connections, the who you know, and how do you cultivate and leverage those relationships. And so that third one, that who you know, is probably most important to network your way onto the right boards and to be able to screen the boards. And so that's the other thing is there's board due diligence that you need to do before you join one. One of our earlier questions was about people getting in an organization and not being there long term. I think one of the ways that you can help in your own journey is to do a lot of homework. We're usually excited that we got the offer to get on a board. You shouldn't actually join every board that comes across your desk because of the things we talked about before of does it fit culturally, does it fit with your values, does it fit in terms of the work style? But it is a journey. And I'd also say get started and experiment. Get onto some committees that don't fit to your strengths. Again, just because I'm an accountant, I don't always sit on the audit committee because I want some other experiences. Don't let them put you on the, whatever the equivalent of the communications committee would be. Get onto a committee that you don't feel comfortable being on so that you can learn, but also so that you can bring a fresh perspective to that committee.
Awesome. Awesome. Archie, final thought?
Wow. Final thought would, particularly from the standpoint of social entrepreneurship, it still is truly entrepreneurship. Focus in on continuing to test, continuing to take risks. We were one of the mistakes that a lot of social entrepreneurs make is they forget about the for-profit opportunity often that's inside of their organizations. And this speaks to the sustainability question. Just because you're a non-for-profit or a social enterprise doesn't mean that you've got to live on volunteerism and philanthropy. Often you are actually creating value in a way that you can charge for some of those services. It's not a dirty word, it's not a bad thing, and actually can help drive the sustainability of the organization because you've got a balanced attack in terms of ways to drive revenue, but also cover some of your costs that comes outside of philanthropy. And so again, you've got this balancing act. That would be my word to social entrepreneurs, to leaders more broadly. Start tiptoeing, identify what that cave is, and start figuring out ways to tiptoe in to start making some progress against it because your treasure waits on the other side.
Wow. Wow. Archie, thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much for imparting this wisdom today and what an engaged conversation. I mean, truly, I just, the way that you help us think through our own leadership journey, I sense a lot of people are going to be using terms like leadership currency or, hey, where am I on my 5C journey, right? Or even, as you heard, I'm going to be using walking around resume.
Yes, man. Yes.
But really, I mean, it's intentional, right? And it's looking at yourself and saying, hey, I have more assets than liabilities, and flipping it and really kind of leaning into your leadership journey. And I think we all benefited from you. I'm going to give a final, and it's going to be a commercial, guys. So I'm just going to just openly say this. All those principles are in this book. And listen, how many of us read books on leadership all the time? Some are good, some aren't. This is one that you're going to keep on your desk and reference often. It's really solid. Listen to the podcast. We've got these links out in the bio, but also one of the things I'd say, and this is going to sound maybe awkward with Archie here, but for all of you, Archie also gets engaged with corporations and brings that Harvard background. So like even coaching leadership teams or groups. So I'll leave it to that. You can get in touch with me to figure out how to get in touch with Archie, or go to Archie's website and get in contact with his team directly. With that, I want to thank Archie. And I also want to do one last thing, which is just a short promo. Because guys, we did this, and I have to say, Adam Lake and his team did this, and I couldn't be more thrilled. We already have another Impact Council event Monday.
Wow.
Earth Day. How exciting. This is going to be awesome. Adam, I got to tell you, I'm set up to sell this. You brought it to life earlier. I'm going to turn it to you. Why don't you tell everyone who we have on this star-studded panel for Earth Day?
Happy to. So we've got our very own Abner Hayes, who is my fellow co-chair. We've both recently joined Impact Communications Institute. And we're bringing in two really awesome people to join us for a chat. We've got Jeanette Rush. She leads on the marketing and digital for NYC as a city, and is also a massive expert in artificial intelligence. Will it make our jobs better, or will it make us all have to go and find different jobs? So that will be an interesting conversation. And then a good friend of mine, Jerome Foster, he is record breaking. He was the youngest ever climate advisor to the president. He's an activist, a social entrepreneur. And what we're all going to be talking about is during Earth Day, Earth Week, Earth Month, what's the next big conversation in climate, and how can we learn from different sectors, from health, from tourism, from activism? How can we bring all these things together to make climate action happen through the power of Impact Communications? And it's at 12 o'clock on Monday. Please join.
Adam, thank you for pulling that and curating that opportunity. We're all going to be joining that, and I would encourage all of you, let your teams know. This is something that I would bring in, because this is going to be an engaged conversation. And then Archie, thank you for making this one of our very special Impact Council events. Your wisdom was fantastic. We really appreciate you. Best of luck to you.
Thank
To
you.
all
Thank
your-
you so much for having me.
So thank you all. And thank you everyone for joining today.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Tessa, anything else that needs to be covered? Are we good?
You got it. And we'll see everyone who's here today back on Monday.
Awesome. Thank you all. Take care. Have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Archie.
Thank you.